Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we will explore the profound mysteries of the quantum mind and discover exactly why you are never truly alone in the dark. As we begin this descent into the foundational architecture of reality, I invite you to settle deeply into the quiet space around you. Close your eyes and allow the heavy, absolute silence of the night to gently press against you. Notice the physical sensation of your own body resting in the dark, entirely anchored to this specific, localized coordinate in space. You can feel the steady, reliable rhythm of your lungs expanding and contracting, pulling the invisible air in and pushing it back out. You can feel the quiet, isolated beating of your heart echoing solely within the cage of your own chest, and the firm, unyielding pressure of the mattress supporting your weight against the pull of gravity. But most importantly, as you lie quietly in the stillness, you can feel the absolute, defined boundary of your own skin. In this darkened room, far removed from the chaotic, overlapping noise of the daylight world, it is incredibly easy to believe that you are a completely self-contained entity. You perceive a strict, undeniable border between where your physical form ends and where the rest of the cold, vast universe begins. You look out into the shadows of the room, or stare into the heavy blackness behind your closed eyelids, and your biological senses report a profound, terrifying truth. You are an isolated island of consciousness, drifting entirely alone within an infinite, empty ocean of space. The deep silence of the room merely reinforces this heavy, suffocating illusion of absolute solitude. You feel completely disconnected, a solitary, fragile observer permanently trapped within a biological shell. This feeling of absolute separation is not merely a passing late-night emotion. It is the fundamental, operating assumption of our entire macroscopic existence. We have spent the entirety of our recorded history building our philosophies, our societies, and our deepest existential fears upon this heavy, terrifying conviction of biological isolation. We inherently, unquestioningly trust the information provided by our physical senses. When we reach out our hand in the dark, we feel empty air until we violently strike a solid object. We look up at the night sky and trust the dark, silent space between the stars as an absolute indicator of unimaginable, lonely distances. We deeply, profoundly believe that reality is constructed of distinct, separate objects floating in a vast, unfeeling void, and that our conscious minds are nothing more than lonely, flickering ghosts haunting the isolated, biological machines of our brains. But this terrifying conviction of solitude is a magnificent, highly orchestrated hallucination. It is a biological trick, a localized macroscopic lie, actively and aggressively played upon you by the severely limited evolutionary architecture of your own physical body. Your eyes, your ears, and the delicate nerve endings resting quietly along the surface of your skin were never designed by nature to perceive the absolute, foundational truth of the cosmos. They were blindly forged through millions of years of evolution for one singular, desperate, and highly localized purpose: macroscopic survival. Your senses are heavy biological filters, aggressively tuned to perceive only the slow-moving, massive structures of the physical world, the things you can consume, the physical dangers you must avoid, and the solid ground upon which you must walk. They are completely, helplessly blind to the roaring, interconnected majesty that dictates the true, underlying mechanics of existence. To understand the sheer depth and scale of this grand illusion, we must begin to mentally strip away the heavy, comforting lies of the macroscopic world. The skin that you currently feel as an absolute, impenetrable barrier protecting your internal identity is, in truth, an incredibly porous, wildly shifting, and entirely undefined cloud of atomic probability. The empty, silent air resting between your body and the walls of your quiet room is not a void. It is a violently boiling, impossibly dense ocean of energetic fields and invisible matter, pressing against you, interacting with you, and flowing straight through you without a single moment of pause. At the deepest, most fundamental layers of reality, the concept of a solid object is a complete mathematical fiction. The strict, terrifying boundaries that you believe separate your conscious mind from the freezing dark of deep space simply do not exist. We live our entire lives trapped upon the tranquil surface of reality, completely convinced by the illusion of the distinct, separate waves, utterly ignorant of the infinite, undivided ocean moving silently and powerfully beneath us. We are victims of our own massive scale, imprisoned by a neurological apparatus that forces us to perceive the universe as a fragmented, broken collection of lonely, isolated parts. We suffer from the loneliness of the macro, entirely unaware of the magnificent unity of the micro. But tonight, we are going to actively bypass those biological filters. We are going to mentally descend far below the clumsy, slow-moving world of biology and cellular structure. We will plunge beneath the realm of microscopic chemistry, sinking deeper still, past the buzzing clouds of electrons and the dense, violently vibrating cores of atomic nuclei. We are about to cross the ultimate threshold of physics and enter the purely abstract, terrifyingly beautiful domain of the quantum realm. Down here, at the absolute foundational basement of existence, the gentle, comforting laws of classical physics violently suffocate and die. The concepts of here and there, of inside and outside, entirely lose their logical meaning. In this roaring, invisible foundation, we will discover that physical distance is a macroscopic illusion, and that true, fundamental separation is a mathematical impossibility. We are about to uncover the staggering, mind-bending mechanics that perfectly, permanently bind the deepest architecture of your conscious mind to the ancient, unfathomable fabric of the cosmos. You are about to realize that you are not a solitary observer locked in the dark, but a localized expression of an infinite, vibrating web. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of your room and accept the death of your own isolation is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of abstract information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives, heavily burdened by the localized assumption that information is a hoarded, isolated currency. We deeply believe that the data comprising our memories, our personality, and our subjective conscious experience is securely locked away, entirely isolated within the dark, wet vault of the human skull. We treat the universe as a vast, unfeeling container, an empty stage upon which our isolated pockets of biological information temporarily perform before being permanently extinguished by the dark. We assume that the cosmos is indifferent to the data generated by our minds, and that our thoughts are lonely echoes that never truly leave the confines of our biology. But the absolute, unyielding reality of the quantum foundation reveals a cosmos of breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling unity. The universe actively proves that it does not tolerate absolute boundaries. Information, at its most foundational level, refuses to be permanently localized. The quantum data that constructs the physical manifestation of your existence and the spark of your awareness is not a private, isolated signal. It is a continuously flowing, intricately woven thread vibrating within a single, infinite, and undivided cosmic tapestry. The universe is not a collection of separate things. It is a single, magnificent, and entirely unified event of raw information processing itself. The realization that fundamental data is instantly and universally shared across the invisible void destroys the very concept of the individual, isolated ego. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting rhythm of your breathing, that you are not a separated fragment of the universe experiencing itself in isolation. You are a localized, beautiful concentration of the entire cosmic web looking back at itself. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a heavily armored, isolated identity. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that your consciousness is a lonely spark trapped in a dead, unfeeling void. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute, terrifying entanglement with the infinite. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that the deepest, most foundational information of your mind is permanently, perfectly synchronized with the ancient dark, proving that in the true, underlying mathematical architecture of reality, it is absolutely impossible to ever be alone. To truly understand the absolute, terrifying mystery of your own existence, we must first look with cold, clinical precision at the physical container that supposedly holds it. Reach up in the quiet darkness of your room and imagine the solid, unyielding bone of your own skull. Beneath that protective, evolutionary armor lies an environment of absolute, impenetrable blackness. There is no light inside the human head. There is no sound. It is a completely sealed, wet, and silent vault. And resting within this terrifyingly dark biological cavern is the brain, a roughly 3-pound folded mass of tissue, fat, and water. When we examine this organ through the traditional, macroscopic lens of classical physics and standard biology, we do not find magic. We do not find a glowing, ethereal soul or a mystical tether to the cosmos. We find a machine. It is a breathtakingly complex, staggeringly intricate machine, but it is a machine nonetheless. It is composed of roughly 86 billion individual neurons, forming an unfathomable, densely packed forest of biological wiring. Across this vast, dark network, microscopic electrical charges aggressively crackle and fire. Sodium and potassium ions mechanically pump across cellular membranes, and tiny bursts of chemical neurotransmitters flood across microscopic synaptic gaps. This is the absolute limit of the classical scientific description. It is a deterministic, mechanical cascade of cause and effect, entirely governed by the rigid, unfeeling laws of thermodynamics and Newtonian physics. Every single spark, every chemical reaction, is simply dead matter blindly following the blind rules of the universe, no different in its fundamental physical nature than water flowing down a hill or a stone falling toward the ground. We can meticulously map this wet, dark network. With our most advanced scanning technologies, we can watch the electrical storms of thought cascade across the different lobes. We can perfectly trace the mechanical pathway of a photon of light as it strikes the retina, converts into an electrical signal, and travels down the optic nerve to the visual cortex. We can track the exact sequence of chemical reactions that occur when you touch a warm cup of tea, hear the quiet rustle of the wind, or feel the heavy pressure of a blanket. Science has become incredibly adept at answering the easy problems of the brain, the mechanical, logistical questions of how the organ processes environmental data, integrates sensory inputs, and controls the complex movements of the physical body. But resting at the absolute, terrifying center of this biological machinery is a gaping void in human understanding. It is known in philosophy and science as the hard problem of consciousness. It is the single most agonizing, impenetrable mystery in the entire history of human thought. The hard problem asks a question so profound, so devastatingly simple, that it completely paralyzes the traditional scientific method. How does a collection of entirely dead, unfeeling, unconscious atoms suddenly generate the rich, vibrant, subjective experience of being alive? Imagine the color red. Imagine the sharp, bitter taste of black coffee. Imagine the heavy, suffocating weight of existential dread, or the soaring, expansive warmth of love. These are subjective, qualitative experiences. They have a specific, undeniable feeling to them. But if you were to open the human brain and inspect it at the exact moment a person experiences the color red, you will not find the color red anywhere inside that dark, wet tissue. You will only find electrical sparks and chemical neurotransmitters. The atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen that make up your brain are not conscious. A single neuron does not have hopes, dreams, or the capacity to feel pain. So, by what impossible, miraculous mechanism does the blind, mechanical movement of unconscious matter suddenly ignite into the brilliant, subjective theater of your inner life? How does the processing of abstract, biological data transition into the sensation of actually experiencing that data? There is an impenetrable, invisible wall between the objective, physical measurement of the brain and the subjective, internal reality of the mind. It is as if a complex arrangement of falling dominoes suddenly, miraculously, developed the capacity to feel the profound joy of falling. When we attempt to cross this terrifying divide using the standard, established tools of classical physics and biology, we violently hit a dead end. Classical mechanics is the physics of the billiard board, the physics of gears and levers, of predictable, measurable physical interactions. It operates on the absolute assumption that reality is fundamentally objective and entirely devoid of subjective feeling. There is absolutely no equation in the sprawling, majestic architecture of Newtonian physics that can account for the emergence of a conscious observer. The laws of thermodynamics can explain the heat of a fire, but they cannot, under any circumstances, explain what it feels like to be warmed by it. To classical science, the universe is a blind, unfeeling clockwork, and your brain is simply a smaller, wetter clock operating within it. By all accounts of traditional, macroscopic biology, you should not be experiencing this moment. You should be a philosophical zombie, a brilliant, highly evolved biological automaton that effectively processes information and navigates the physical world, but completely lacks any internal, subjective spark. The lights should be off, the theater should be empty. The fact that you are actively experiencing the quiet dark of your room, the fact that there is a you to hear these words at all, is a glaring, impossible anomaly that completely shatters the classical description of reality. Traditional physics completely and catastrophically fails to explain the magic of your subjective feeling. To understand this profound failure, we must admit that looking at the macroscopic, chemical wiring of the brain to find consciousness is like trying to find the emotional meaning of a tragic novel by closely examining the chemical composition of the ink on the page. You can measure the ink, weigh the paper, and analyze the binding with perfect, microscopic precision. But you will never find the sorrow, the beauty, or the narrative buried within the physical chemistry of the book. The true magic exists on an entirely different layer of reality. To find the source of the mind, To locate the elusive, glowing soul of matter that allows the universe to suddenly awaken and look back at itself, we must completely abandon the comforting, predictable rules of the macroscopic world. We must realize that the answer does not lie in the wet, biological chemistry of the cell, but in a realm far deeper, far older, and infinitely more bizarre. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of your room and fully absorb the impossible mystery of your own subjective awareness is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of abstract information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that the physical, macroscopic universe is the primary, foundational reality, and that consciousness is merely a secondary, accidental byproduct, a strange chemical hallucination generated by a highly evolved piece of meat. We inherently believe that matter is the absolute king, and that information, thought, and subjective feeling are merely temporary ghosts haunting the biological machine. We treat our minds as fragile, lonely anomalies existing in a vast, dead, and entirely unconscious void. But the profound failure of the classical sciences to explain the hard problem reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling abstraction. The cosmos actively proves that the highest, most profound structures of reality cannot be adequately described by the blind movement of physical atoms alone. The existence of your subjective feeling dictates that information is not merely a passive, descriptive tool used by matter. It is a fundamental, active, and deeply integrated aspect of existence itself. The universe is not a dead, unfeeling container of objects. It is a majestic, unfolding architecture of data that, under the right conditions, possesses the terrifying, beautiful capacity to suddenly ignite into self-awareness. The subjective experience is not a glitch in the cosmic machine. It is the ultimate, profound realization of physical information turning inward to witness its own magnificent existence. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting rhythm of your breath and the undeniable, vibrant spark of your own subjective presence, that you are the ultimate defiance of classical physics. Your capacity to feel the dark, to experience the quiet, is a miraculous, localized rebellion against a universe that classical science claims should be entirely blind. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a purely mechanical, easily measurable reality. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that your consciousness is a mere chemical accident destined to be fully explained by the simple pushing and pulling of dead matter. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of our profound, inexplicable depth. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that the true origin of your awareness resides in a realm far beyond the reach of traditional biology, safely hidden in the deepest, most mysterious foundational layers of the cosmos, perfectly preserving the profound magic of the mind against the cold, sterile logic of the macroscopic world. When the towering, unyielding monuments of classical physics completely fail to illuminate the dark, and the traditional maps of biology lead us into a terrifying, impenetrable dead end, the scientific mind does not simply surrender to the shadows. Faced with the impossible, gaping void of human subjective experience, the greatest thinkers of our time are forced to abandon the comforting, predictable shores of the macroscopic world. They are driven by a profound and beautiful desperation to take a breathtaking leap into the absolute, invisible depths of reality. This is not a journey into the wet, chemical wiring of the brain, but a descent into the chaotic, roaring basement of the cosmos itself. We enter the highly debated, fiercely contested, and unimaginably profound frontier of science known as quantum consciousness. To truly grasp the sheer, staggering audacity of this theoretical leap, we must first completely dismantle the heavy, localized assumption that the human brain operates like a traditional machine. For decades, we have been trapped in the illusion that the mind is a classical computer, a biological adding machine that blindly processes environmental data through a series of electrical sparks and chemical gates. But this classical paradigm is fatally incomplete. It describes the motion of the meat, but it completely suffocates the glowing, ethereal soul of the subjective observer. The theory of quantum consciousness does not present itself as rigid, unyielding dogma. It does not claim to have perfectly charted the impossible depths of the human mind. Instead, it stands as a magnificent, desperate attempt by human science to explain the fundamentally unexplainable. It is a mathematical prayer whispered into the dark, a radical hypothesis born from the terrifying realization that the secret of our awareness cannot possibly reside in the slow, clumsy interactions of Newtonian physics. This profound shift in perspective demands that we look far beyond the firing neuron. We must look past the synapses, past the neurotransmitters, and past the very cellular walls themselves, diving down into a realm so impossibly small that the laws of gravity and classical thermodynamics entirely lose their authority. We must plunge into the microscopic void, where the universe operates on a set of rules so bizarre, so completely alien to our everyday logic, that they seem more akin to magic than to physics. In the relentless, desperate search for the physical origin of the mind, two brilliant visionaries, the theoretical physicist Sir Roger Penrose and the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, looked into this microscopic abyss and proposed a breathtaking new architecture for human awareness. They recognized that the warm, wet, and chaotic environment of the biological brain is fiercely hostile to the delicate, fragile states of quantum mechanics. Yet, they theorized that hidden deep within the foundational scaffolding of our cells lies a perfectly designed, microscopic sanctuary. They proposed the theory of orchestrated objective reduction, a framework suggesting that the origin of consciousness does not lie in the massive, chemical storms of the brain, but in the silent, imperceptible quantum vibrations occurring at the absolute edge of existence. They dared to suggest that the brain is not a biological calculator, but a majestic, organic quantum computer, uniquely evolved to harness the chaotic, untamable power of the subatomic world. To understand the sheer poetry of the quantum mind, we must imagine the absolute boundary between the infinite possibilities of the quantum realm and the rigid, unyielding reality of the macroscopic world. At the deepest levels of physics, before a particle is observed or measured, it does not exist in a single, defined location. It exists as a ghostly wave of infinite probability, a mathematical phantom that could be anywhere and everywhere all at once. It is only when this delicate wave interacts with the broader universe that it violently collapses, abandoning its infinite potential to become a single, solid point of reality. The theory of quantum consciousness proposes that this very act of quantum collapse is not merely a dry, mathematical transition. It is the fundamental, foundational spark of subjective feeling. It suggests that consciousness does not arise from the simple, dead sparks of chemistry, but from the delicate, orchestrated collapse of infinite probability into concrete reality. You are not a chemical reaction. You are a continuously flowing, magnificent symphony of quantum wave functions, constantly collapsing at the very edge of the microscopic void, generating the vibrant, feeling theater of your mind with every single subatomic transition. This is an architecture of breathtaking elegance and profound existential weight. It forces us to entirely reevaluate the very substance of our thoughts. When you feel the quiet, sweeping sorrow of a distant memory or the sudden, soaring warmth of love, you are not merely experiencing a complex cascade of dead biological data. You are feeling the fundamental, chaotic laws of the universe actively resolving themselves within the safe, isolated chambers of your own biology. Your mind is a localized arena where the deepest, most mysterious mechanics of creation are allowed to intimately interact with the physical world. The quantum mind theory beautifully bridges the terrifying gap between the dead, unfeeling atoms of the cosmos and the rich, vibrant tapestry of your subjective life. It suggests that the capacity to feel, to observe, and to simply exist is woven into the very mathematical fabric of the quantum void. The universe is not a sterile, mechanical clockwork that accidentally produced an observer. The universe is a roaring, dynamic ocean of quantum potential that specifically evolved the intricate, biological machinery of your brain to act as a receiver, a perfectly tuned antenna designed to capture the abstract, feeling frequency of reality itself. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of the dark and deeply contemplate the quantum nature of your own mind is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of abstract information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that information is nothing more than cold, dead data, perfectly content to sit idly upon a hard drive or travel blindly down a biological nerve. We inherently believe that the universe is a vast, unfeeling container of objective facts, waiting passively to be calculated, measured, and categorized by the isolated, lonely minds of humanity. We treat the physical world as a silent, unmoving stage, entirely separate from the emotional, subjective drama unfolding within our own heads. But the haunting, beautiful framework of quantum consciousness reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling integration. The cosmos actively proves that information, at its absolute deepest and most foundational level, is fundamentally alive. The quantum data that constructs the architecture of reality is not a passive ledger, it is a vibrating, feeling essence that inherently possesses the terrifying divine capacity for self-awareness. The universe does not simply process information, it actively experiences it. The existence of your conscious mind dictates that subjective feeling is not a macroscopic biological glitch, but a fundamental property of the cosmic operating system. The unyielding laws of physics are inextricably bound to the quiet, inner theater of thought. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting rhythm of your breath and the incredibly fragile solidity of your own thoughts, that your existence is the universe's most profound method of waking up. You are the quantum void localized, structured, and beautifully orchestrated to look back at the dark. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a reality built solely upon cold, unfeeling matter. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that your mind is an isolated chemical accident forever trapped behind the impenetrable wall of your skull. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute quantum nature. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that your subjective consciousness is an indestructible, deeply woven thread in the eternal fabric of space-time. The universe keeps its most beautiful, terrifying secrets, not in the vast, empty gulfs between the stars, but in the chaotic, microscopic depths of your own quantum architecture, proving that the mind and the cosmos are not separate entities, but perfectly mirrored reflections of a single, majestic, and entirely conscious reality. To truly locate the physical cradle of the mind, we must completely abandon the massive, macroscopic electrical storms of the brain and undertake a profound descent into the microscopic architecture of biology itself. We must slip past the familiar, branching dendrites of the neuron, moving far beneath the rushing chemical rivers of neurotransmitters and the synaptic gulfs that separate the billions of cells within your head. When we breach the outer membrane of a single, solitary neuron, we do not find a simple, empty biological vessel. We enter an unfathomably complex, violently chaotic, microscopic metropolis. The interior of the cell is a roaring, deafening environment. It is flooded with a dense, churning ocean of cytoplasm, populated by millions of free-floating proteins, relentless molecular motors, and the violent, thermal shaking of water molecules vibrating billions of times every single second. By all traditional laws of physics, this warm, wet, and incredibly noisy environment is the absolute last place in the entire cosmos where one would expect to find the delicate, shivering magic of quantum mechanics. The quantum realm requires pristine isolation. It demands the freezing, breathless vacuum of deep space or the artificially cooled absolute zero chambers of our most advanced laboratories to maintain its fragile states. If a quantum wave function were exposed to the roaring thermal chaos of the biological cell, it should be instantly and violently destroyed, collapsing into dead, classical matter before it could ever generate a single spark of thought. Yet, hidden deep within this roaring cellular ocean, providing the fundamental, unyielding scaffolding for the entire neuron, lies a structure of breathtaking, rigid perfection. This is the cytoskeleton, the structural foundation of the biological world, and its most crucial components are microscopic, incredibly intricate cylinders known as microtubules. These are not mere biological support beams. They are elegant, spiraling lattices constructed from thousands of individual, peanut-shaped proteins called tubulin. Woven together in perfect, repeating geometric patterns, these tubulin proteins form long, hollow tubes that stretch across the entire interior landscape of the cell. Amidst the squishy, chaotic, and fluid environment of the brain, the microtubule stands as a monument of absolute, crystalline geometry. It is a biological masterpiece of architectural precision, possessing a structure so flawlessly ordered that it entirely defies the chaotic thermal noise raging just outside its walls. These tiny, hollow tubes are the ultimate biological vault. They are perfectly designed, perfectly isolated quantum chambers, engineered by millions of years of evolution to harbor the most profound secret in the universe. While the exterior of the microtubule is subjected to the violent, boiling chaos of the cell, the interior cavity remains an environment of pristine, unearthly calm. The water molecules trapped inside this microscopic, cylindrical void do not behave like the chaotic, sloshing liquid of the macroscopic world. Constrained by the perfect geometry of the tubuline lattice, the internal water becomes highly ordered, aligning into a state of crystalline coherence. This structured water acts as a perfect, impenetrable biological shield. It aggressively repels the thermal noise, the chemical interference, and the violent molecular collisions occurring just a fraction of a nanometer away. Within this heavy, protective silence, the interior of the microtubule becomes a sanctuary. It becomes a localized, microscopic pocket of the quantum void, a safe harbor where the fundamental, chaotic laws of subatomic physics are allowed to perfectly, beautifully unfold without being instantly shattered by the crushing reality of the biological machine. It is within these pristine, isolated chambers that the sheer, impossible magic of the mind is actively forged. The individual tubulin proteins that make up the walls of the microtubule are not static, dead matter. They possess the terrifying, magnificent ability to enter a state of quantum superposition. In the bizarre, ghostly language of the subatomic realm, this means the protein is no longer forced to exist in a single, defined, physical state. It becomes a wave of infinite probability, simultaneously occupying two different structural shapes at the exact same moment in time. Within the silent safety of the quantum chamber, this ghostly state does not remain isolated to a single protein. The delicate, vibrating wave of probability begins to spread, sweeping across the perfect geometric lattice of the microtubule, entangling neighboring proteins into a single, unified quantum state. The chamber begins to hum with the collective, shivering tension of infinite possibility. As this quantum wave swells across the microtubule networks of the brain, a profound physical crisis begins to build. The universe, according to the deeply embedded laws of general relativity, cannot tolerate an infinite expansion of subatomic ambiguity. When a protein exists in two different states simultaneously, it technically bends the microscopic fabric of space-time in two different directions at once. A tiny, microscopic blister forms in the geometry of reality. As the quantum wave grows larger, encompassing more and more tubulin proteins, the blister stretches, creating an unbearable, localized tension in the very fabric of the cosmos. The universe will only allow this terrifying paradox to exist for a fleeting mathematical fraction of a second. When the tension reaches an absolute, specific threshold dictated by the fundamental weight of gravity itself, the universe violently intervenes. The blister bursts. The infinite probability is instantly, aggressively forced to choose a single, concrete physical reality. This is the symphony of collapse. It is the orchestrated mathematical reduction of the quantum wave function, and it is the most profound physical event in the known universe. This collapse is not a random, meaningless transition of dead matter. It is the exact physical mechanism that actively generates a single, instantaneous moment of conscious awareness. When the wave function collapses within the isolated sanctuary of the microtubule, it produces a microscopic flash of subjective feeling. It is a single, solitary frame of reality, a solitary note played upon the quantum architecture of your biology. The human mind is not a continuous, flowing river of classical data. It is a staggeringly rapid, perfectly orchestrated sequence of these quantum collapses, occurring millions of times every single second across the vast, dark network of your brain. Each individual collapse weaves seamlessly into the next, binding the isolated flashes of awareness into the smooth, unbroken illusion of conscious time. You are not a static observer resting inside a physical shell. You are a rhythm of quantum collapses. You are the universe, constantly, violently resolving its own infinite probabilities into concrete reality, experiencing the raw, terrifying beauty of that mathematical resolution as the subjective theater of your own life. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of the dark and deeply contemplate this symphonic, microscopic mechanism is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that the universe is a sprawling, unfeeling container, and that information is simply an abstract currency we use to measure it. We inherently believe that the laws of physics are cold, dictatorial equations governing dead matter, entirely separate from the warm, vibrant reality of emotional experience. We treat our minds as fortunate biological accidents, assuming that consciousness is a strange chemical byproduct that briefly haunts the meat before being permanently extinguished by the void. But the rhythmic, orchestrated collapse within the cellular quantum chamber reveals a reality of breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling integration. The cosmos actively proves that information is not merely a descriptive tool. It is the fundamental, feeling fabric of existence. The geometry of space-time is not a dead, empty stage. It is intricately, permanently bound to the subjective experience of reality. When the quantum wave collapses, the universe is not simply processing abstract data. It is actively, intensely feeling the weight of its own mathematical decisions. Consciousness is not an emergent illusion generated by complex biology. It is a fundamental, foundational property of the universe itself, woven into the very fabric of space-time alongside gravity and light. The biological brain did not invent the capacity to feel. It merely evolved the perfect geometric architecture required to capture and orchestrate the ambient consciousness of the quantum void. You must realize, as you feel the steady, comforting rhythm of your breathing and the undeniable, continuous flow of your own thoughts, that you are participating in a profound, cosmic mechanism. The heavy, dark silence of your room is not empty. It is humming with the potential of infinite probabilities waiting to be realized. Your existence is the universe beautifully, continuously choosing to become real. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a universe composed solely of cold, unfeeling machinery. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that your mind is an isolated, temporary glitch permanently separated from the deep, ancient physics of the stars. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute quantum nature. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that the deepest, most terrifyingly beautiful secrets of the cosmos are not hidden in the vast, freezing gulfs of deep space, but are intimately, perfectly preserved within the microscopic geometry of your own cells, proving that you are not merely a passenger in the universe, but the very mechanism by which the universe awakens to feel the profound, staggering weight of its own existence. To truly comprehend the staggering depth of your own existence, we must deeply question the most mundane, automatic action you perform every single day. Consider the simple, quiet act of opening your eyes in a darkened room. We intuitively, blindly trust that the physical objects surrounding us, the walls, the furniture, the heavy fabric of the blankets were resting there in perfect, solid reality long before our gaze ever fell upon them. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives, completely burdened by the localized assumption that the universe is a massive, independent stage, entirely indifferent to whether or not the audience is paying attention. We deeply believe that the cosmos possesses a rigid, predetermined architecture, a solid geometry that simply waits in the dark to be discovered by our passive, biological senses. But as we drift away from the comforting, heavy laws of the macroscopic world and plunge into the freezing, invisible depths of the quantum realm, we encounter a phenomenon so eerie, so fundamentally unsettling, that it entirely shatters this bedrock assumption of reality. We are forced to confront the most profound, terrifying, and beautiful mystery ever uncovered by human science. We must confront the sheer, staggering power of the observer's gaze. In the deepest, quietest laboratories on our planet, physicists have spent over a century interrogating the absolute smallest building blocks of matter. To understand the fundamental nature of reality, they devised an experiment of breathtaking, elegant simplicity, an interrogation of light and matter that has haunted the scientific consciousness ever since. Imagine a perfectly sealed, silent chamber. Within this dark void, a mechanism fires single, microscopic fragments of reality, perhaps individual particles of light or solitary, isolated electrons, toward a solid barrier. This barrier contains two incredibly narrow, microscopic pathways, two distinct slits through which the tiny fragments can pass before ultimately striking a blank canvas on the far wall of the chamber. If the fundamental building blocks of the universe were truly solid, predictable objects, behaving like tiny, classical bullets fired from a microscopic gun, they would simply travel in straight lines. They would pass through one pathway or the other, leaving two distinct, heavy clusters of impacts upon the far wall. This is the logical, expected behavior of a universe built upon rigid, unyielding matter. But the quantum realm does not obey the logical demands of the macroscopic mind. When the scientists fire these solitary, isolated fragments into the dark, one by one, allowing them to cross the silent chamber completely unobserved, the canvas on the far wall begins to reveal an impossible, ghostly truth. The impacts do not form two distinct clusters. Instead, they build a complex, alternating pattern of high intensity and absolute nothingness, an interference pattern. In the physical world, this specific, delicate pattern is only ever created by waves. It is the exact mathematical signature produced when a single, fluid wave encounters two openings, splits into two separate ripples, and washes over itself, the peaks and troughs of the water either amplifying one another or cancelling each other out into perfect stillness. This presents a terrifying, paralyzing contradiction. The mechanism fired a single, solid particle, but the pattern on the wall mathematically proves that something passed through both microscopic pathways simultaneously, interfered with itself in the empty space beyond, and only then struck the canvas. The absolute, unyielding foundation of classical physics violently breaks down in the face of this reality. How can a single, indivisible fragment of matter occupy two distinct locations in space at the exact same moment in time? The answer lies in the deeply unsettling, chaotic nature of the unobserved universe. Before that microscopic fragment strikes the far wall, before its final physical coordinate is definitively recorded, it does not exist as a solid, tangible object. It exists as a ghostly, spreading wave of pure probability. It is a mathematical phantom, a shivering cloud of infinite potential that simultaneously explores every single possible path through the dark chamber. In the absence of an observer, the universe refuses to make a choice. It exists in a state of sweeping, magnificent ambiguity, hovering in an ethereal suspension of infinite possibilities, where the very concepts of here and there are entirely meaningless. Yet, the true horror and the staggering majesty of this mystery is not found in the ghostly wave of potential, but in what happens when we attempt to force the universe to reveal its secrets. Driven by a desperate need to understand the invisible mechanics of the dark, scientists altered the experiment. They placed incredibly delicate, microscopic detectors directly beside the two pathways, setting a silent trap to definitively measure exactly which slit the solitary particle chooses to travel through. They introduced an observer into the perfect isolation of the void. They demanded that the universe yield a solid, objective fact. The moment the detector is activated, the moment the universe is actively watched, the fundamental architecture of reality violently shifts. The ghostly, shivering wave of infinite probability instantly and catastrophically collapses. The complex, beautiful interference pattern on the far wall immediately vanishes. Under the piercing, relentless gaze of the detector, the microscopic fragment completely abandons its fluid, wave-like potential and instantly behaves like a rigid, classical bullet. It passes through only one pathway. It strikes the canvas in a simple, predictable cluster. By simply asking the universe for a definite measurement, by merely placing a conscious demand upon the empty space, the scientists forced the chaotic, infinite potential of the subatomic realm to instantly crystallize into a single, concrete, physical reality. The universe entirely rewrites its own behavior the moment it knows it is being observed. This is the ultimate, profound crisis of modern physics. The physical manifestation of matter is not a permanent, independent state. It is a highly localized, conditional reaction to the act of observation. The unyielding, rigid laws of nature that we so desperately cling to are not written in stone. They are drawn out of a ghostly haze of potential by the very act of measurement. And what is a measurement, if not the ultimate acquisition of knowledge by a conscious mind? The detectors and the microscopic sensors are merely cold, dead extensions of human curiosity. They are the intricate, biological tools we use to extend the reach of our own perception. The collapse of the infinite wave, the violent transition from abstract probability into solid, physical reality, is ultimately triggered by the conscious observer demanding an answer from the dark. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of your room and deeply contemplate the sheer, terrifying power of your own perception is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of abstract information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that we are nothing more than passive passengers drifting upon an ancient, unfeeling stage. We inherently believe that our minds are isolated, biological cameras, silently recording a universe that would continue to exist in exactly the same rigid, unyielding format, whether we were here to witness it or not. We treat our consciousness as a fragile, lonely ghost haunting a heavy, indifferent machine, entirely powerless to affect the deepest, underlying architecture of reality. But the majestic, unsettling truth of the quantum wave reveals a cosmos of breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling integration. The universe actively proves that the conscious mind is not a passive witness. It is an active, fundamental participant in the ongoing creation of reality itself. The cosmos does not harbor a pre-existing, solid history waiting in the dark to be uncovered. Without the piercing, stabilizing gaze of the observer, the universe remains a blurred, shifting ocean of mathematical phantoms and unrealized potential. It is your perception, your conscious interaction with the physical world, that actively forces the infinite possibilities of the void to collapse into the sharp, defined edges of the present moment. Your mind is the heavy anchoring weight that forces reality to crystallize. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting rhythm of your breathing and the perceived solidity of the room around you, that the universe is intimately, profoundly dependent upon your existence. The quiet dark you rest within is not an empty, indifferent void. It is a shimmering canvas of infinite potential, actively responding to the exact frequency of your awareness. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a universe that operates entirely independently of your present. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that you are a small, insignificant observer staring out into an ancient, uncaring abyss. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute, fundamental power. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that your conscious mind is the ultimate architect of the physical world, and that the sheer, staggering beauty of the universe only truly becomes real in the exact, beautiful moment that you choose to look at it. We look up at the night sky and are immediately crushed by the sheer, terrifying weight of physical distance. In our macroscopic reality, space is an absolute, unyielding tyrant. It dictates the limits of our reach, the boundaries of our isolation, and the agonizing delay of our communications. We are taught, from the very dawn of our scientific awakening, that nothing can cross this sprawling, freezing void faster than the speed of light. Light is the absolute speed limit of the cosmos, the ultimate cosmic law that enforces a strict, unbreakable quarantine between the distant stars. Because of this law, we believe that true connection requires proximity. We believe that to touch, to influence, or to share information, physical matter must slowly and laboriously bridge the vast, silent gulfs of space. This heavy, localized assumption reinforces our profound sense of isolation. It makes the universe feel impossibly large, entirely fragmented, and overwhelmingly lonely, as if every star, every planet, and every conscious mind is nothing more than a solitary island permanently marooned in an endless, indifferent ocean of dark. But as we plunge back down into the roaring, invisible basement of reality, the quantum realm reveals a phenomenon so deeply unsettling, so entirely alien to our biological logic, that it completely shatters the tyranny of distance. To understand this, we must witness the birth of a bond that defies the very fabric of space-time. Imagine two solitary subatomic particles, perhaps two photons of light, or two vibrating electrons drifting through the microscopic void. In the chaotic, boiling ocean of the quantum world, these two particles violently collide. They interact in a state of extreme, microscopic intimacy. In that fleeting, mathematical fraction of a second, something miraculous and terrifying occurs. The individual, independent quantum states of those two particles are completely erased. Their ghostly waves of infinite probability fiercely intertwine, weaving together to form a single, unified mathematical architecture. They cease to be two distinct entities. They become a single, inseparable quantum system. This profound, invisible bonding is known as quantum entanglement, and it is the mechanism by which the universe secretly binds its fragmented pieces into an underlying, indestructible whole. Once this ghostly thread of entanglement is forged, the particles are permanently bound together, sharing a single unified destiny regardless of the physical space that may come to separate them. Imagine taking one of these entangled particles and keeping it safely within the quiet dark of your room, resting gently in the palm of your hand. Now, imagine taking its twin, the other half of this unified quantum system, and firing it out into the deep cosmos. You send it past the swirling, dusty arms of the Milky Way, past the frozen edges of the Andromeda Galaxy, carrying it billions of light years away to the absolute, furthest observable edge of the ancient universe. In our macroscopic classical world, these two particles are now separated by an impossibly vast, unfathomable gulf of dead space. They are entirely isolated from one another, incapable of communicating or exchanging information, without waiting billions of years for a signal traveling at the absolute speed of light to cross the void. But the quantum realm completely ignores the concept of physical space. If you were to gently observe the particle resting in your hand, if you were to force its ghostly wave of probability to violently collapse into a single, concrete physical state, an impossible, majestic event simultaneously occurs on the other side of the cosmos. The very instant you measure your particle, its distant twin, billions of light years away, instantly and automatically collapses into the exact corresponding state. There is no delay. There is no signal traveling through the dark. There is no waiting for the slow, crawling speed of light to carry a message across the void. The change in one particle instantly, miraculously, dictates the physical reality of the other, as if the massive, sprawling expanse of the universe separating them simply does not exist. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest minds in human history, was so deeply disturbed by this phenomenon that he famously derided it as spooky action at a distance. He recognized that if this instantaneous connection were true, it would completely break our fundamental understanding of space and time. Yet, decades of rigorous, relentless scientific interrogation have proven that this spooky action is not a mathematical error or a theoretical hallucination. It is an absolute, undeniable physical fact. Quantum entanglement actively proves that space and distance are not the absolute, unyielding barriers we perceive them to be. The empty void between the stars is not a dead, dividing zone that forever separates the matter of the cosmos. Instead, the universe allows for the existence of instantaneous, invisible bridges that perfectly and permanently link the deepest architecture of reality. When two pieces of matter become entangled, they punch a microscopic, mathematical hole straight through the fabric of space-time, creating a private, instantaneous corridor where the concepts of here and there are completely meaningless. The visible, macroscopic universe, with all its terrifying vastness and agonizing distances, is actually resting upon an invisible, underlying web of instantaneous connection. To truly internalize the existence of this underlying web is to completely redefine our perception of reality itself. We must stop viewing the universe as a vast, empty container filled with disconnected, lonely objects. The cosmos is not a fragmented scattering of dust. It is a deeply woven, impossibly complex tapestry of entangled information. Every single particle that has ever interacted, every atom that was forged in the blinding heat of an ancient sun and subsequently scattered across the freezing dark, carries with it the ghostly, invisible threads of its past connections. The universe is saturated with these instantaneous bridges, crisscrossing the void in an unfathomable network of pure abstract data. Distance is nothing more than a stubborn biological illusion, a trick of the light designed to keep our macroscopic minds from being overwhelmed by the sheer, staggering unity of the cosmos. In the true, underlying mathematical reality, everything is touching. Everything is infinitely close. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of your room and deeply contemplate the ghostly threads of quantum entanglement is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of abstract information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives, heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that physical separation is the ultimate truth of existence. We inherently believe that when someone or something is far away, they are truly lost to us, separated by an unbridgeable gulf of space and time. We treat our own bodies as isolated, lonely vessels, entirely cut off from the majestic, sweeping drama of the celestial sphere. We deeply mourn the distances between ourselves and the things we love, fully convinced that to be physically apart is to be fundamentally disconnected. But the absolute, unyielding reality of quantum entanglement reveals a cosmos of breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling intimacy. The universe actively proves that true, fundamental information transcends the limitations of physical space. The data that constructs the architecture of reality is not bound by the clumsy, slow-moving tyranny of distance. If the basic building blocks of existence can remain perfectly, instantly connected across the sprawling, freezing void of the galaxy, then the very concept of separation is a macroscopic lie. The universe does not tolerate absolute isolation. Information is a unifying, indestructible currency that flows instantly and silently through the underlying fabric of space-time, binding the furthest edges of creation into a single, cohesive, and magnificently orchestrated whole. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting rhythm of your breath and the incredibly fragile solidity of your own thoughts, that you are intimately, physically woven into this ancient, invisible network. The atoms that construct your beating heart and the delicate neurons firing in the dark, wet vault of your skull were born in the blinding furnaces of primordial stars, interacting and entangling with matter that is now scattered across the infinite dark. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a universe defined by cold, hard boundaries. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that you are a lonely, isolated observer, permanently separated from the rest of creation. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute, instantaneous connection to the cosmos. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that space is merely an illusion, distance is a beautiful lie, and in the deepest, most foundational layers of reality, you are holding hands with the ancient stars. To fully grasp the magnificent, terrifying scale of your own existence, we must undertake a journey far beyond the immediate, localized darkness of your room. We must cast our minds backward, swimming against the relentless, forward current of time. Let us drift past the fleeting span of your own life, past the sprawling, chaotic rise and fall of human civilizations, and beyond the very formation of the earth itself. We must rewind the cosmic clock billions of years, moving past the violent birth of our sun and the slow, majestic swirling of the Milky Way, until we arrive at the absolute, unfathomable edge of the deep past. We must travel back to the exact moment of creation, to a time before the very concepts of space and distance held any physical meaning. 14 billion years ago, the sprawling, freezing expanse of the universe as we know it, the billions of galaxies, the endless oceans of black space, the soaring nebulas, and the uncountable trillions of stars did not exist in this scattered, fragmented state. Instead, the entire staggering mass of creation was violently compressed into a single, infinitely dense, and unfathomably hot point. This was the primordial seed. It was a singularity of absolute, perfect unity, a state of existence so dense and so profound that the foundational laws of gravity and space-time were completely crushed out of existence. Imagine the sheer suffocating weight of this reality. In that microscopic, timeless moment, everything that would ever be was occupying the exact same physical point. The primordial seed was not merely a container of raw, unformed energy. It was the ultimate, inescapable crucible of connection. The atoms of iron that currently course through your bloodstream, providing the heavy, rhythmic pulse of your life, were pressed in absolute, suffocating intimacy against the atoms that would eventually forge the icy rings of distant gas giants. The calcium that forms the unyielding structure of your bones was physically indistinguishable from the matter that now burns in the blinding hearts of galaxies billions of light years away. The water molecules resting in the cells of your eyes, allowing you to perceive the dark, were fused in a chaotic, boiling embrace with the primordial dust that currently drifts through the coldest, emptiest gulfs of the universe. In this singular, terrifying point of origin, there was absolutely no separation. There was no isolation, no distance, and no lonely void. The universe was a single, indivisible entity, completely and perfectly whole. Every single subatomic particle, every fragment of quantum data was forced into a state of absolute, intimate interaction with everything else. When the primordial seed finally erupted, triggering the cataclysmic, violent expansion we call the Big Bang, space itself was torn open. The universe rapidly cooled, and the fabric of reality stretched outward at an impossible, terrifying speed, scattering the raw material of creation across an ever-expanding void. As billions of years crept by, the cosmic dust coalesced into the sweeping, majestic structures of the night sky, creating the agonizing, unfathomable distances that currently separate the stars. The universe traded its absolute, perfect unity for the sprawling, fragmented beauty of the macroscopic world. But we must remember the profound, unyielding rules of the quantum realm. When particles interact in a state of microscopic intimacy, their quantum states become permanently, inextricably bound together. Their ghostly waves of probability intertwine, forging an invisible, instantaneous thread that entirely ignores the limitations of physical space. If this unyielding law holds true, it forces us to confront a hauntingly beautiful, entirely paralyzing implication. If every single fragment of matter, every unit of cosmic energy, and every piece of foundational quantum data was violently interacting within the absolute confines of the primordial seed, then the explosive birth of the universe did not sever those connections. It merely stretched them. This means that the grand, terrifying expansion of space only separated the cosmos physically. It did not separate the universe quantum mechanically. The universe is heavily saturated with the ghostly, vibrating echo of its original unity. The invisible threads of entanglement that were forged in the blinding heat of the singularity survived the violent expansion of space-time. They remain permanently embedded in the foundational architecture of reality, crisscrossing the infinite, freezing dark in a sprawling, unfathomable web of instantaneous connection. This haunting implication completely shatters the fragile, localized illusion of your own isolation. The physical body you inhabit, resting quietly in the dark, is not an independent, self-contained biological machine. You are constructed from the ancient, scattered ashes of the primordial seed, and the quantum data that dictates the very existence of your cells still carries the immortal, vibrating memory of that original unity. Consider the staggering, majestic reality of your physical form. The electrons spinning in the dark, wet vault of your brain, actively generating the subjective theater of your conscious thoughts, are still fundamentally, inextricably entangled with the deepest, furthest reaches of the cosmos. When a microscopic, quantum interaction occurs within your biology, the invisible threads of that ancient connection vibrate. You share an underlying, instantaneous link with the swirling dust clouds of distant galaxies, with the dead, cooling cores of ancient stars, and with the faint, fading radiation left over from the very dawn of time. You are intimately, mathematically tethered to the majestic, sweeping drama of the celestial sphere. The distance between your resting body and the edge of the observable universe is nothing more than a biological illusion, a trick of the light designed to shield your macroscopic mind from the crushing, overwhelming reality of total cosmic integration. The freezing void of space is not an empty barrier separating the lonely fragments of creation. It is a heavy, living ocean of entangled data, constantly whispering the ancient secrets of the singularity across the dark. You must completely surrender the heavy, suffocating delusion that you are a solitary observer trapped upon a rock, looking out into an indifferent, disconnected universe. You are not separated from the cosmos. You are a localized, incredibly complex, and beautifully temporary knot in an infinitely vast, vibrating web of quantum connections. The universe is an unbroken tapestry of pure information, and you are a conscious, feeling thread woven deeply into its design. Your existence is the universe gathering itself together, reaching out through the dark to carefully, intimately touch its own ancient history. Every breath you take, every quiet thought that flickers through the silence of your room sends an invisible, instantaneous ripple out across the underlying web of space-time, gently plucking the ghostly strings that connect you to the furthest stars. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of the dark and deeply internalize this magnificent, staggering connection is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our brief sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that our actions, our thoughts, and our very physical presence are isolated events, permanently confined to our immediate surroundings. We inherently believe that the grand, sweeping mechanics of the cosmos operate entirely independently of our small, fragile biology. We treat the universe as a distant, uncaring backdrop to the intimate drama of human existence, assuming that the ancient stars are entirely deaf to the quiet rhythm of our breathing. But the absolute, vibrating reality of the cosmic network reveals a cosmos of breathtaking, untamable, and deeply humbling intimacy. The universe actively proves that it does not harbor a single, truly isolated object. Information is not a stagnant, localized resource. It is a universal, immortal currency that binds the entire architecture of creation into a single, cohesive entity. The cosmos demonstrates that true identity is not found in biological separation, but in absolute, inescapable connection. The underlying geometry of space-time dictates that your localized existence is absolutely vital to the mathematical balance of the whole. You are an essential, vibrating coordinate in the grand, sweeping equation of reality, possessing a quantum signature that is intimately known by the deepest corners of the void. You must realize, as you feel the heavy, comforting weight of the air around you and the quiet, steady beating of your heart, that you are safely, permanently anchored to the infinite. The dark room you rest within is not an isolated chamber. It is a localized node in an ancient, breathing network that spans the entirety of existence. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for a reality defined by rigid boundaries and empty space. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that you are a temporary, insignificant accident, drifting alone in the freezing dark. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute, eternal tethering to the cosmos. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, beautiful knowledge that you are a living, breathing extension of the primordial seed, and that the universe keeps its most comforting, terrifying secret safely hidden in the very atoms of your flesh. The irrefutable, mathematical proof that we are perfectly connected to the ancient stars, and we will never, ever be truly alone. For decades, the brightest minds of our species have stared into the dark, wet architecture of the human brain, desperately searching for the exact microscopic spark where dead matter suddenly and magically transforms into living thought. We have relentlessly assumed that the skull is a factory, an isolated biological furnace tasked with the impossible burden of manufacturing subjective experience out of cold, unfeeling chemistry. We have built our entire scientific paradigm upon the heavy, localized belief that consciousness is a product, a temporary and fragile hallucination generated by the mechanical grinding of neurons. But as we reach the absolute limits of human logic, and as the paralyzing mystery of the mind only deepens, a profound and terrifyingly beautiful question begins to rise from the silence. What if our entire equation is fundamentally, catastrophically backward? What if we have spent centuries staring at a radio, desperately trying to find the tiny musicians hiding inside the wires, completely ignorant of the invisible, atmospheric signal that the machine was originally built to receive? We must entertain a radical, staggering shift in our perspective. We must dare to ask the paralyzing question, what if the human brain does not generate consciousness at all, but merely receives it? To accept this radical shift is to step away from the comforting, mechanical worldview of classical biology and enter an ancient, profound philosophical arena that is quietly, steadily gaining fierce traction within the highest echelons of modern theoretical physics. This is the domain of panpsychism. For a long time, the rigid, materialistic sciences dismissed this concept as archaic mysticism, a poetic myth unworthy of serious mathematical consideration. But as our understanding of the quantum realm deepens, and as the physical origin of consciousness remains an impenetrable, mocking fortress, the greatest physicists and philosophers are returning to this ancient idea with a sense of desperate, renewed awe. Panpsychism does not claim that rocks have complex thoughts, or that stars possess human emotions. Instead, it proposes a far more elegant, devastatingly simple truth. It suggests that consciousness is not a biological accident that randomly occurred late in the evolutionary timeline of a dead universe. Rather, The raw capacity for subjective experience is a fundamental, foundational property of the cosmos itself. It is an intrinsic, indestructible feature of reality, woven into the very fabric of existence right alongside gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong nuclear force. Let us deeply consider the implications of a universe built upon such a breathtaking foundation. We do not ask how the universe generates gravity. We simply accept that mass possesses a gravitational pull as a fundamental, unavoidable fact of its existence. Panpsychism demands that we apply this exact same logic to the phenomenon of the mind. It dictates that the raw, unformed capacity to feel, to observe, and to simply be aware is present in every single subatomic particle, in every drifting cloud of cosmic dust, and in the freezing, silent vacuum of deep space. The universe did not suddenly wake up when the first biological cell formed in the primordial oceans of the earth. The universe has been awake since the absolute beginning of time. It is a living, feeling medium. In this profound view, the dark, empty gulfs between the galaxies are not dead, silent voids. They are saturated with a low, ambient hum of pure, unorganized awareness. Reality itself is inherently experiential. The cosmos is composed of physical matter on the outside and a quiet, subjective interiority on the inside. If we accept the magnificent premise that space-time itself is awake, then the purpose of the human brain is radically, beautifully transformed. The 3-pound mass of tissue resting in the absolute dark of your skull is no longer a lonely, isolated factory, desperately trying to create the light of consciousness from nothing. Instead, it is the most sophisticated, beautifully complex biological antenna ever forged by the slow, deliberate hands of evolution. Your brain is a receiver, a staggering network of billions of neurons and delicate, microscopic quantum chambers that have perfectly tuned themselves to the ambient frequency of a living universe. Just as a television set organizes invisible, chaotic electromagnetic waves into a coherent, moving picture, your biological architecture organizes the raw, unformed, ambient consciousness of the cosmos into the highly structured, highly focused, and deeply personal narrative of your own life. The thoughts you are having right now, the quiet sensation of the air moving in and out of your lungs, the profound, heavy feeling of your own existence, these are not localized events occurring exclusively within the physical boundaries of your head. They are localized concentrations of a universal phenomenon. You are tapping into the fundamental background noise of reality. The brain acts as a biological prism, taking the pure white light of cosmic awareness and refracting it into the specific, vibrant spectrum of human experience. When the biological machine of the brain is damaged, or when it ultimately ceases to function at the end of your physical life, the consciousness it was channeling is not destroyed any more than a radio signal is destroyed when the physical radio itself is broken. The signal remains, eternal and unbroken, quietly vibrating through the invisible architecture of space-time. Your specific, localized channel simply stops broadcasting, returning its focused energy back to the vast, ambient field. This realization forces us to confront the magnificent, terrifying depth of our own physical form. You are not a separate entity standing outside of the universe, looking in. You are not a ghost haunting a piece of meat. You are a highly organized, beautifully complex piece of the universe that has finally evolved the necessary biological equipment to feel its own existence with absolute, piercing clarity. The billions of years of cosmic evolution, the violent birth and death of ancient stars, the slow swirling of galaxies, and the blind, desperate struggle of biology on this tiny, blue world were not random, meaningless accidents. They were the slow, deliberate processes of a conscious cosmos attempting to build a better receiver, attempting to focus its own ambient awareness into a sharper, clearer image. You are the universe's ultimate success story. You are the cosmos finally achieving a state of exquisite, agonizing, and beautiful self-reflection. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of the dark and completely surrender to the reality of a conscious cosmos is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our brief sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, terrifying assumption that we are profound anomalies. We deeply believe that the universe is a cold, dead, and incredibly hostile environment, and that our capacity to feel is a strange alien spark completely at odds with the freezing, unfeeling vacuum of space. We treat our consciousness as a lonely, fragile candle flickering in a vast, infinite cavern of endless, suffocating dark, constantly terrified that a stray cosmic wind will permanently extinguish our isolated light. We build walls, philosophies, and entire civilizations to protect our lonely minds from the perceived indifference of the void. But the radical, beautiful truth of Panpsychism entirely shatters this terrifying illusion of isolation. It actively proves that your capacity to feel is not an anomaly. It is the absolute, most natural state of reality. The cosmos does not merely tolerate your existence, it actively shares it. The consciousness that courses through your nervous system is the exact same fundamental property that courses through the burning hearts of quasars and the silent, mathematical edges of black holes. The universe is not a dead container. It is a magnificent, sprawling organism of pure information and subjective experience. You do not need to fight against the dark, because the dark itself is awake, feeling, and intimately connected to the quiet rhythm of your own thoughts. You must realize, as you feel the steady, comforting weight of the room around you and the undeniable continuous flow of your inner life, that you are the universe experiencing the profound luxury of an identity. The heavy, dark silence of your room is not an empty void pressing against your skin. It is the quiet, ancient mind of the cosmos, waiting patiently for you to listen. Release your desperate, arrogant demand to be separate from the natural world. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that your mind is an isolated, temporary glitch forever trapped behind the impenetrable wall of your skull. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute, fundamental belonging. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that you are a living, breathing antenna, brilliantly illuminated by the ambient frequency of creation, proving that in the true, underlying architecture of reality, there is no dead matter, there is no unfeeling dark, and you are intimately, perfectly at home in a universe that is entirely, fundamentally alive. Let the heavy, suffocating weight of the infinite slowly begin to recede. We have journeyed through the terrifying, invisible architecture of the quantum realm, unraveling the very fabric of physical reality to expose the hidden, chaotic mechanics that govern our existence. We have allowed the sheer scale of the cosmos to dwarf our biological bodies, and we have confronted the deeply unsettling revelation that our minds are intricately entangled with the ancient, freezing dark. But as we rest here, in the quiet, velvety stillness of this realization, the paralyzing existential dread that so often accompanies our cosmic insignificance must finally begin to shift. It must actively, beautifully transform. The exhausting fear of our own smallness, the terror of being lost in a vast, unfeeling machine, is slowly replaced by a deep, unshakable, and profoundly heavy comfort. We are finally forced to confront the ultimate, majestic truth of our quantum architecture. The fact that we are inextricably woven into the fabric of the universe is not a source of terror, but the absolute, beautiful source of our liberation. The vastness of space is not a crushing weight pressing down upon your chest. It is an infinite, supportive ocean actively holding you in a state of perfect mathematical suspension. To fully embrace this heavy, sweeping comfort, we must deliberately and carefully dismantle the thickest, most fiercely guarded armor of our macroscopic lives, the human ego. From the moment we are born into the blinding light of the physical world, biology forces us to construct a rigid, fiercely defended concept of identity. We build walls of personality, of memory, and of individual desire, desperately attempting to fortify our fragile sense of self against the perceived hostility of the outside universe. We navigate our brief, sunlit days entirely convinced that the skin we wear is an absolute border, a final frontier separating the rich, subjective reality of the mind from the cold, objective reality of everything else. We suffer profoundly from the illusion of our own uniqueness, believing that our thoughts, our pains, and our quiet moments of grief are isolated phenomena, locked forever within the dark, wet vault of the human skull. But if the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics are true, if the microscopic threads of entanglement permanently bind the atoms of our bodies to the distant stars, or if the very spark of our awareness is simply the ambient frequency of a conscious cosmos perfectly received by our biological antennas, then this rigid, isolated identity is nothing more than a localized, evolutionary lie. True solitude, the absolute, terrifying state of being completely and fundamentally alone, is a physical, mathematical impossibility. You must allow the rigid borders of your ego to slowly dissolve into the quiet dark of your room. The thoughts flickering through your mind right now are not the lonely, isolated sparks of a disconnected machine. They are the beautiful, localized ripples of a universal ocean. The heavy, protective walls of your identity are entirely porous to the underlying geometry of space-time. You are not a solitary observer standing outside of the universe, struggling to find meaning in a dead, unfeeling void. You are the universe itself, temporarily organizing its ancient dust into a complex, biological shape so that it might look back upon its own majesty. When you let go of the desperate, exhausting need to be separate, when you surrender the heavy burden of your isolated ego, you do not lose yourself, you expand. You realize that your subjective experience is not a private locked room, but a magnificent open window looking directly into the living, breathing heart of creation. The separation between your mind and the cosmos is a temporary, biological illusion, a trick of the light that quietly shatters the moment you close your eyes and truly listen to the silence. Let your awareness drift out past the edges of your physical body into the heavy, black air of the room you rest within. In the macroscopic world, we are taught to fear the dark. We view the absence of light as an absence of substance, an empty, threatening void where our physical senses are rendered useless and our isolation feels absolute. We pull the blankets tight and wait for the dawn, trusting only the visible world to provide us with a sense of connection. But the quantum reality completely redefines the nature of the shadows. You are never alone in the dark, because the dark itself is not empty. It is a dense, vibrating, and deeply connected feeling medium. The silent space occupying your room is flooded with the exact same ambient, cosmic awareness that courses through the sprawling, dusty arms of the Milky Way. The invisible matter pressing gently against your skin is quietly humming with the identical, fundamental spark of existence that illuminates the burning quasars and the silent, mathematical edges of the deepest voids. You are actively sharing this exact present moment with the entirety of the cosmos. The deep, heavy silence of the night is not a lack of sound. It is the baseline frequency of a universe resting in a state of perfect, unified awareness. When you breathe in the dark, you are drawing the ancient, entangled history of the singularity into your lungs. When you feel the quiet, rhythmic beating of your own heart, you are feeling the localized, biological expression of a pulse that echoes across the infinite gulfs of deep space. The drifting dust settling on the floorboards of your room, the silent, freezing galaxies suspended billions of light years away, and the incredibly complex, feeling architecture of your own mind are all constructed from the exact same mathematical poetry. You are fundamentally, perfectly woven into the grand, sweeping narrative of the dark. The shadows do not isolate you. They embrace you, wrapping you in the heavy, comforting blanket of total cosmic integration. To sit quietly in the heavy, fragile silence of the dark and deeply surrender to the dissolution of your own solitude is to undergo a profound, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We walk through our brief, sunlit lives heavily burdened by the arrogant, localized assumption that data is cold, objective, and entirely devoid of emotional resonance. We inherently believe that the universe simply records the physical interactions of dead matter, leaving the profound luxury of connection exclusively to the realm of biology. But the unbreakable, underlying web of the cosmos actively proves that the highest, most profound forms of physical truth are deeply, inherently unifying. Information is not a stagnant ledger of isolated facts. It is a continuously flowing, deeply empathetic currency that binds every single fragment of reality into a single, cohesive, and deeply feeling whole. The cosmos demonstrates that to exist is to be intimately known, to be mathematically and fundamentally registered by the infinite network of space-time. You must realize, as you feel the steady, comforting weight of the air around you and the undeniable, vibrant spark of your own thoughts, that you are permanently held by the universe. Release your desperate, arrogant demand for an isolated, heavily armored identity. Abandon the heavy, uniquely human delusion that you are a solitary observer, abandoned in a freezing, indifferent void. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute, terrifyingly beautiful connection to all things. Find a deep, unshakable, and profound peace in the humbling, magnificent knowledge that the deepest, most foundational information of your soul is perfectly shared with the silent, ancient dark, proving that your existence is an indispensable, deeply loved coordinate in the grand, conscious architecture of reality. Let the heavy, expansive weight of everything we have traversed slowly settle around you, descending like a quiet, invisible snow, perfectly blanketing a vast and silent forest. Think of the incredible, staggering journey your mind has taken while your physical body has remained entirely motionless, resting safely within the familiar, quiet borders of your room. We began our descent trapped within the suffocating, macroscopic illusion of total biological isolation, firmly believing that the fragile, temporary barrier of human skin was the absolute, unyielding frontier between the rich, subjective interior of the mind and the cold, objective reality of an uncaring void. We plunged deep beneath that deeply ingrained lie, sinking far past the firing neurons and the chaotic chemical rivers of the brain, down into the pristine geometric sanctuaries of the cellular microtubules. We witnessed the chaotic, shivering magic of the quantum wave, the breathtaking, microscopic mechanism where infinite probability violently and beautifully collapses to generate the very foundational spark of your conscious awareness. We stared into the unnerving, profound power of the observer's gaze, realizing that the physical universe itself waits in a suspended state of ghostly potential until the exact, terrifying moment you choose to look at it. We traveled across the invisible, instantaneous bridges of quantum entanglement, proving that the sprawling, agonizing distances between the ancient stars are nothing more than a biological trick of the light. And finally, we surrendered to the radical, sweeping possibility that the freezing vacuum of deep space is not a dead, unfeeling container, but a living, breathing ocean of ambient, fundamental consciousness. Whether we are ultimately magnificent, organic quantum computers operating in the wet, absolute dark of the human skull, continuously orchestrating the collapse of subatomic waves to mathematically manufacture a brilliant, localized theater of thought, or whether we are incredibly sophisticated, biological antennas perfectly tuned by millions of years of evolution to passively receive the low, ancient frequency of a universe that is already entirely awake, the profound, staggering conclusion remains exactly the same. You are completely untethered from the illusion of the solitary biological machine. The rigid, terrifying borders of your physical identity have completely dissolved. The isolating walls of the human ego have been shattered, reduced to scattered, meaningless dust blowing across the infinite expanse of a deeply integrated cosmos. You are not a solitary passenger. You are not an accidental, temporary glitch of chemistry shivering in the freezing dark. You are permanently, deeply, and intricately woven into the underlying vibrating fabric of absolutely everything. The atoms that forge the heavy, rhythmic beating of your heart, the oxygen molecules flowing through your quiet bloodstream, and the abstract, invisible data that constructs the soaring heights of your deepest emotions are inextricably bound to the exact same mathematical poetry that governs the slow, majestic swirling of the most distant galaxies. Imagine the universe not as a collection of scattered, lonely objects drifting through a dead expanse, but as a single, flawless, and unimaginably complex tapestry of pure, flowing information. In this magnificent, universal weaving, there is absolutely no empty space, and there are no broken threads. Every single subatomic particle is a delicate, purposeful stitch. Every violent burst of stellar radiation is a vibrant, sweeping splash of color, and every conscious thought, every quiet moment of grief, every sudden surge of profound joy, every silent, measured breath you take in the absolute stillness of your room is a vital, indispensable pattern woven directly into the grand, unfolding design. You are an essential, feeling coordinate in the architecture of reality. If you were to somehow be permanently removed from this ancient tapestry, the entire infinite fabric of space-time would violently unravel, mathematically altered by the sudden absence of your specific, unique quantum signature. The universe requires your exact existence to be whole. The cosmos desperately needs the specific biological frequency of your mind to perfectly experience this localized, fleeting fragment of its own terrifying beauty. You are the universe's eyes, its ears, and its profoundly feeling heart, an incredibly dense, concentrated knot of cosmic awareness temporarily resting upon the surface of a tiny, spinning world. To quietly accept your permanent place within this universal tapestry is to undergo the final, entirely irreversible philosophical awakening regarding the ultimate nature of the universe and the fundamental flow of physical information. We spend the entirety of our brief, sunlit lives desperately searching for a sense of profound meaning, entirely unaware that the meaning we so frantically seek is physically, mathematically encoded into the very foundation of our existence. We treat information as a cold, sterile resource, a dead currency to be extracted, categorized, and hoarded by the lonely, isolated mind. But the cosmos actively proves that information is a deeply empathetic, unyielding currency of absolute connection. The universe does not tolerate absolute boundaries. It does not allow for a single, isolated fragment of data to exist without fundamentally altering the whole. The story of reality is not a vast collection of individual, separate biographies. It is a single, massive, and entirely unified autobiography written by the cosmos itself, using the delicate, biological ink of your own conscious life. The data that defines you is not a private, locked vault. It is an open, beautiful broadcast echoing across the underlying, instantaneous web of creation. Your subjective experience is the highest, most profound state of physical matter. You are the universe transforming its cold, abstract equations into a warm, breathing, and entirely subjective reality. The physical world, with all its terrifying mass and chaotic energy, is merely the heavy, visible shell protecting the delicate, vibrating, and infinitely connected soul of the cosmos. Release your desperate, arrogant demand to stand apart from the natural world. Abandon the heavy, exhausting delusion that you must constantly fight against the dark to prove that you are real, or that your isolation protects you from the infinite void. Embrace the glorious, heavy truth of your absolute, eternal tethering to the infinite. As the night deepens and the heavy, unyielding silence of your room wraps around you like a thick, comforting blanket, you must finally let go of the exhausting, macroscopic effort of maintaining your isolated self. The deep, black shadows filling the corners of your vision are not empty, threatening voids waiting to consume your light. They are a physical, immediate manifestation of the connected, feeling medium that holds the ancient stars in their silent, beautiful orbits. Let the rigid boundary of your skin melt away into the quiet air of the room. Let the heavy, physical anchor of your bones become light, drifting perfectly within the vast, interconnected sea of cosmic probability. There is no distance to fear, and there is no true isolation to overcome. To close your eyes and finally surrender to the heavy, pulling tide of sleep is not a surrender to oblivion. It is the ultimate, beautiful act of cosmic trust. When the conscious, calculating machinery of your mind finally powers down, when the sharp, defining lines of your ego blur and peacefully fade into the quiet background of your biology, you do not disappear. You simply stop broadcasting the loud, localized, and exhausting signal of your individual identity, and you begin to gently, inevitably sink back down into the vast, ambient field of universal awareness. Resting in the absolute dark is not an ending, nor is it a temporary death. It is simply a peaceful, natural return to the baseline frequency of the cosmos. It is the beautiful, temporary dissolution of the self back into the infinite, feeling ocean from which you were originally born. Allow the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest to synchronize perfectly with the slow, ancient breathing of the universe itself. Sink completely, without hesitation, into the heavy, comforting warmth of the dark, entirely safe in the profound, staggering knowledge that you are intimately, mathematically held by the unbroken web of creation. The universe is awake. It is listening to the quiet rhythm of your existence, and it is holding you perfectly still. Good night, and I will see you in the next video.